listening to yet another episode of Smash the Bug. My name is Joseph Maxwell. Here is my brother Jesse. We are here to share with you some information that I believe will help you become a better and more impactful developer on your quest to smashing bugs. Before we get into the actual great content of what we're going to talk about here, make sure that you've subscribed to all the ways that you can get this great information, whether that is the Swift Otter channel on YouTube or any one of the podcast syndication platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify, you name it, we're there. So without further ado, let's jump into our content. Jesse, you have the scoop on what we're going to talk about today.
We're going to talk about technical interviews or interviews in general. Quite an exciting subject, I suppose.
Well, it's kind of important. Like if you want to get a new job, if you're wanting to, expand your horizons, you gotta, there's a recruiter that's breathing down your neck. You probably have to sit through an interview unless you're just like so incredibly good you don't have to actually have an interview.
That's right. Well, they probably should interview you anyways, but it makes me think of something that I think a lot of us feel some level of apprehension about. It's kind of like taking a test.
Yeah.
When we go in to take a test, we're not likely to feel like excited about it, like, oh yeah, we got this. We're usually, even if we're super prepared for it, we're usually a little bit apprehensive about what's going to happen because that's that unknown, is that what's going to happen in that time.
Yeah.
And
am I going to pass or am I going to fail?
That's the question, and that's one of those things you don't know until the end. Sometimes even a little ways after that.
Well, and what we thought, we could just go through and talk about today. Okay, here's what you need to do, step in order to prepare for an interview. But I don't know, there's a whole bunch of information about that online, and there's even some questions that you can prepare for, and I've seen a number of those type of resources. So I don't think we should reinvent the wheel there. So we kind of had another idea, and one that I'm actually kind of nervous about.
Yeah, so I'm gonna ask you some questions, just like I would somebody who comes to us and is gonna go through an interview with me.
And the interesting aspect of this is that Jesse's interviewed a lot of people on it, like the technical interviews for a lot of people, and he's actually never done it to me. So this could be an abject disaster, and I could be fired on the spot because this would be like what you would call a retroactive interview. So and after the fact, oh wait, I maybe should have done a better job interviewing him or her. So in this case, I'm interested to see what questions he asks because I have not been a part of that. I don't even know what questions he's going to ask me now. So this could be a bit of a disaster. I'm a little bit nervous. I'm telling the truth.
Well, I'll tell you, I want you to be comfortable. I want you to feel like we're just having a regular conversation. It's okay. I just want to get to know you. I want to get to know who you are a little bit, and especially the aspect of your technical knowledge. So excellent. I understand why you feel a little bit apprehensive about this, but you don't need to.
Sounds like you've said that before.
This is true. I do like to start off that way because honestly, I want people to feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. And I think your point about preparing for an interview is a great one. Mm-hmm. It's just like you prepare for a test. Kind of like there's that similarity there. You prepare for a technical interview. And just refreshing some of those facts, because likely they're going to get into some of those facts. And there's different schools of thought on how important some of those things are. And when I'm talking about facts, I'm talking about specific details, in this case of Magento, of our domain knowledge. So if we're hiring someone who is a technical expert, we're going to expect them to know some of those things. And in my experience, asking some specific questions really kind of sorts out where somebody is at pretty quickly, in addition to those open-ended questions about experience and what they've done and the way that they work and things like that.
Yes. And the other thing I really appreciate is Jesse when he goes into these interviews, he works to make to get the candidate, the person he's interviewing, as comfortable as possible. The thing to remember, whether we're taking a test, whether we're sitting through an interview, whether we're working with a merchant in a stressful situation, stress is another way of saying our body is in a fight or flight mode. There is not clear thinking that is happening, again, when we are about ready to either fight or get out the door real quick. So being comfortable, again, it sounds cliche. If you're a candidate, do your best to be comfortable, but also especially though for the person who is interviewing, do your best to make the candidate feel comfortable.
Yeah, that's right. And actually it's helpful for the candidate too, because I think clearer when I'm not stressed.
That's right.
And so I try to make the candidate comfortable, not only so that they enjoy the time a little bit more, but also so that way they can think clear and provide the best answers that they're capable of.
Nice. Well, I think I've been trying to, I see there's some text on your screen, so I'm trying not to look. So,
Good.
So yeah,
Good.
Again, try to keep this as fair as possible. So
Yep.
I guess you want to throw me a question and
Let's
see
jump
what
in.
happens.
Let's jump in. Yep.
So just so you know, if you do interview at Swift Otter, and this is not a recruitment drive whatsoever, but if you do interview at Swift Otter, there is a chance you will get some of these, but he also might refresh these now that he's talked about a couple of these. So don't study this as if these are the only questions you will be asked if you are interviewed here at Swift Otter.
That's for sure. As a matter of fact, I often change up these questions just a little bit because I usually have some information coming from the candidate anyways, maybe their resume or something like that. And what I want to know is where their strengths are. So I'll usually adjust the questions beforehand to tailor the questions to their strengths so I get an idea of what they're best at. Nice. So jumping right into it, I'm interested to know your web experience. So how long you've been in this area and the things that kind of shaped you and bringing you here. Just a snapshot. Usually I'd get into a little bit more detail, but what's a snapshot of what's shaped you to where you're at?
I thought this was going to be a tough question.
Yeah, for sure. We start off with the hard
I can do
ones.
that one.
You got it? All right.
Yeah, so I've been doing web stuff since I was 15 years old. I'm 32 now, so that's 17 years.
Nice.
I started in PHP, I think when I was 15 years old. That was about when I got my Zen Certified Engineer, which is the PHP certification. That was about when I wrote my, you can call it a shopping cart. That was kind of the old terminology. Nowadays we use the big term e-commerce platform, but no, I called it a shopping cart back then, and it ran a couple $100,000 through.
Hey, it wasn't too long ago that we were still calling them shopping carts.
Yeah, that's fair. But so I built that. It was full of bugs. It was pretty bad. But then it was 2011 that I got started in Magento. I was on a enterprise project. I can't remember the first version that it was, but through the course of that, I ended up getting every Magento 1 certification. I think the last one I got was in 2017, and obviously the Magento 2 certifications as well. So on the Magento side, yes, done front end and a ton of back end.
Nice. What would you say the parts of Magento are that you are least familiar with?
I'm going to say it would be front-end related, specifically less is a big weakness of mine. I've not worked with that for in any decent amount for probably 2 years. I would say that I'm somewhat familiar. I'm more familiar with Knockout and UI components, but I would say less is probably my biggest area of weakness.
Interesting. And when you say less is your area of weakness, you're talking about not the CSS aspect as much as some of the details on how Magento assembles it.
Right.
Or could you clarify that maybe a little bit? So Magento's handling of less.
I feel quite comfortable writing CSS. Of course, HTML, I can write JavaScript any day of the week. But when it comes to understanding how the Magento variables, how they piece together, the Magento functions, breakpoints, I feel very lost when it comes to that stuff. It takes me a while to troubleshoot any bug related to that.
I can understand that. The Luma theme is quite a piece of art.
And we are looking forward to Hoova.
Yes.
Which I just noticed that rhymes. I'm sorry, 1 second. That rhymes. Hoova and Luma. There's kind of the same sound there. So let's
nice.
do a replacement and then we're going to be good.
I'm glad that the technology isn't that similar.
Yeah.
Because that might be a little disappointing.
Yeah.
Because hats off to whoever built the Luma theme, but I tell you what, there's a lot of variables in some of those things, and that is somewhat tricky to track down.
Yeah, I've done it a couple of times. I think there was an upgrade it was probably a year and a half ago. But then again, on my team, there's people like you, so it's not as much of a stress for me at this point. But yeah, it is definitely an area of weakness. I will 100% say that.
Makes sense. How do you deal with brick walls when you come into something and you hit that wall and are like, I don't know what to do next? What do you do then?
Well, I wrote a book about that. I don't know if that's
you are
helpful.
The man to ask.
No, but just in a real nutshell. First, I don't view it as a brick wall. We have to get it solved. It is a problem. It has to be dealt with. It's not the type of thing that I can just pass it off to somebody. It has to be resolved. Otherwise, the merchant's not happy, and that's I lose my job eventually if that's the case. So brick wall, at some point, once you have enough information collected, you can go ask somebody on the team. That is helpful. Leverage other resources you have. But then it comes down to trying anything. And to be frank, today I've been fighting a issue with overrunning cron jobs for probably a week now, and it's been a real sore spot for me. And today, in tracking stuff down, what I ended up doing is I went through every table in this database, and I looked for all the rows in that table that had all the tables that had a lot of rows, and that's where I was going to start in my troubleshooting. I isolated down to the actual cron jobs that were also having some problems. So, that was a brick wall, and actually was able to pinpoint exactly what it is, and it's my product repository again. Then I did a tweet and a LinkedIn post. I gotta love those things.
Wow, that was bringing that store somewhat to its knees at times.
Well, at least the cron, which is the problem is that it has cascading effects.
Yeah.
Because certain products were not being re-indexed when they needed to be, which caused them to be not shown on the front end in the categories. I believe this is the linchpin to a number of problems we've been having for a while.
Oh, that's crazy. Problems usually work like that. Yeah. So that was interesting, though, too, and a little bit outside of the context of what we're talking about, but I'm still curious. You mentioned sorting the tables by the ones that had the most rows. Is that what you said in this recent?
Yeah, there was probably a better way to do it, but I literally went through in SQL Pro, table by table by table, and I pulled out the rows, the ones that looked like they had an abnormally high row counts. So, for example, there's a report product view table, which has way too many rows, like 2 million rows. We use Google Analytics. Why are we logging values to this product view table? There's no reason in my mind. So I'm going to rip that out anyways.
Interesting. Well, that's just something I had never thought to do in terms of debugging technique.
It's at the end of the rope sort of thing. Like
I understand.
I'm trying to do everything I can to figure this out.
So we're talking about brick walls, right?
Yeah,
like
it was a brick wall.
When you get up to something, and I love your perspective on that there's no real brick wall. That everything is doable and solvable with enough time. But there's still those things that feel like brick walls that we run into, and that we have to somehow figure out our way around.
We have to,
and that's an interesting way of thinking about it, and looking at just sheer volume going into tables, and what that might tell us about a problem.
Well, what tipped me off is I was doing I was going to replicate this problem locally and seeing if I could again run the cron jobs, figure out something in my local environment, and I did a MySQL dump of the database. And it was taking a long time, like way longer than it normally takes. And so I was wondering, that was my first question. That's why I went through this, could it be that we have a table with like 5 million rows in there that's just completely gone berserk, which maybe it's logging it out into cron, so I was trying to use that as kind of another attack angle to see what's going wrong with this cron stuff.
Yeah, interesting. Well, that's... I appreciate your answer on that, how you deal with brick walls. So kind of jumping back into the context here.
Back into these interview questions.
Yes. What was something recently that you would say that you felt really satisfied with accomplishing? I want to get into the technical details of that too. Something that you pushed up that PR and sent it over to QA, and you were like, that is awesome. I'm really glad that I did this. I feel like this is almost kind of like a showcase of your technical abilities in some sense. Take me on a little bit of a deep dive into what that looked like.
Yeah, there's been a couple. I think one of my favorite things to do with pull requests is I'm working to test what I'm doing. First, I've been working to write more integration tests, and that's something that I'd gotten lax about for a while. And I'm getting back into it. And actually, I find it really, really satisfying to write solid integration tests. As long as those tests are run, I know this problem is not coming back. In fact, I have to throw this out. Yesterday, I had some integration tests written for a particular piece of functionality. And yesterday, I ended up rebuilding that piece of functionality. I had to make a couple, I changed the method signature, so I had to make a couple of tweaks to how this method was called from my test. I reran the test and it worked. Like I was like, I literally want to jump out of my seat. Like that is so cool because That same test worked no matter what the implementation was behind it. It didn't matter. It still worked in the long run. So that was really cool. The other thing that I take great pleasure in is when I'm work in an area of functionality that we're building on, I work to take in the big picture. Like, is there something else that looks funky? Is there something else that's broken? Is there a select list that needs a please select at the top, like basically a blank entry at the top? So it's trying to have a holistic view. If we have time, let's see here, the time is 15 minutes. Yeah, we got time. So anyways, that big project, that was probably the coolest project I've worked on recently, which is basically a system that calculates really complex pricing. And there was a lot of different offshoots of that. Basically, we had to take this information, calculate it up, how stuff was decorated. So basically, you have this ware, and then you print on it. Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into pricing of this ware and the prints and the print styles and all the stuff that kind of comes together. That was a really fun project that I feel like it was built solid. We've made some tweaks. Of course, there was a couple bug fixes. It was completely tested, and I think it's really withstood the test of time thus far, and being a really good piece of software.
Well, that's great. Tell me just a little bit more about some of the technical architecture behind that, the calculation of pricing.
Yeah, definitely. So what's really important with this, and I'll start at the very beginning, is we need to be able to get a price from a specific data set, right? So this data set could be in the database. It could be coming from the front end. Hey, price this particular product with these particular decorations on it. So it could be coming from the database, which is basically this item has been saved into the cart, or it could be, again, coming from the front end. So we have to build out a standard interface that can then be priced. So no matter where this comes from, we pulled into this interface. So they involved building some, I call them actions. They could probably better termed as services to convert the cart item information into this price request. Also taking it from the front end, loading in as the price request. Then what happens is it goes through a series of calculators, and these calculators are not hard-coded in as all. So using dependency injection, we have an array of calculators that all implement a calculator interface, and it runs through each one of those. All we have to do is add another calculator in. The print charge was the most extensive one because that is loaded in through. There's a whole bunch of other tables and layers in that. So depending on what type of thing you're printing on, whether it's a glass or a shirt, there's different pricing there. And so all that kind of ends up coming together. The print charge is the most complex, and then it's really complex. Like there's a whole bunch of rules in there. I probably don't have time to get into all those rules. But yeah, so basically, and all of those roll up the information. Every one of those calculators returns basically a price response, which means that we have a list of all the prices here available to us, and we log that out so we can go troubleshoot this later if there's a data issue or, hey, if there's a bug. We have this information logged out. Those numbers are then reduced and sent out in response to whatever requested this pricing calculation.
Great. I appreciate that. Let's jump down to some questions that I like to go through. They're gonna be fast. What I'm looking for is a short answer to these questions.
And I haven't given short answers thus far.
But that's okay. I haven't been looking for a short answer so far.
Okay.
But this next section, what I want to do is take a few minutes, and I'm looking for like 2-3 sentences as an answer to each one. Okay. And if you don't know the answer, that's no problem. I have to say that, but I suspect there won't be a whole lot of those for you. But we'll see. I don't mean to up the pressure for you.
Oh, the pressure is high already. This is the part I'm not looking forward to. I can talk about my past experience and the cool things they've done, but now the rubber's meeting the road, so I'm a little bit nervous here.
All right, well, that's okay. We'll just go through these things. Like I said, no worries if you don't know the answer.
Okay.
Just say so, and we'll move right on through it.
I will say one thing. If I don't know the answer, what I need to do is once I get done with this interview, I need to go find that answer. If you ever come across a question that you think your answer is bad, if your answer is whatever wrong, it's not that big of a deal, but the big deal is whether or not you go track that down. If you go figure it out, because hey, you might be asked a question similar to that in the future.
That's great. That's a great point. What are some of the differences between production and developer mode?
Production and developer mode, that's a great one. I think one of the easiest ones is that in developer mode, static assets are symlinked. In production mode, they are not symlinked. They should be pre-built beforehand. In developer mode, the errors are shown. Production mode errors are only logged. So those would be two differences off the top of my head.
Okay. What is text/x-magento init?
That is for the script type for in kicking off. That's the script type for kicking off the JSON which contains the Magento JavaScript information, especially UI components.
Okay. What is a repository?
No, you don't want to get on that one. Repository is the way the Magento implementation. Repository is a centralized it's a centralized service contract for loading, saving information. It's not good to use product repository.
A little plug at the end, just in case you didn't know.
Yeah. It's okay to use order repository, quote repository. It's okay. Customer repository should not use that either, at least until they get the performance issues fixed.
What's the difference between a router and a controller?
Router precedes a controller. A router, basically what was the name of that router? The router basically kicks off the controller. So the router identifies whether it's the REST. It kicks off for the REST. Oh no, I think I'm speaking out of turn on that for REST requests. Router basically kicks off the controller, and if you want, in other words, if the way it's practical application, if we want to create a custom URL path, you would create a router, which would then kick off our own controller. But the router is basically determines what URL and selects which controller to render. Say which controller is taken from there.
Okay. What's the difference between bundled and grouped products?
Bundled and grouped products can have a similar. They can look a little bit similar, but in the end, a group product is a list of products that are added individually to the cart. A bundle product keeps all of those together. So the way it looks in the database, from my memory, is in the quote item table, there is so if you have a grouped product, you add 3 of those to the cart. Those 3 products come in to the quote item table, all of them with the type ID the product type of grouped, and there's no other association past that. There is no parent ID, I think parent ID column. There's no parent ID on that. So for the bundle, then there is a parent ID, and then all the children are below that. On the front end of the rendering, you have a lot more control on a bundle with how the options are rendered. There's radio buttons, checkboxes, and I think drop-down lists. And the big advantage to bundled over grouped is that you can set a discount for those products that are added to the cart.
Okay. Someone wants to print an admin order, but the page looks terrible. It has a menu and action buttons still on it. How would you fix it?
I would use the easiest solution would be to use a print style sheet.
Okay. Would you do an investigation before that, or would you just jump in and apply the print style sheet?
I think I would, of course I would check and see like what else is going wrong there. But I think that the print style sheet would be the way I would look at, again, from a external perspective, that would be the way I would look to, that'd be my first go-to for probably solving that problem.
Okay. What is a return type in PHP?
Basically says what type is going to be returned. So basically you would use this on a method to indicate the outgoing type to ensure that you're returning a value of that type. So, for example, if I have a function is called get product, that should probably return a product interface. If I return an order interface, of course, then the system's going to blow up because I just really screwed up on that. So, yeah, I would say that's what it is.
That's all we will do for the rapid fire questions.
We don't want to destroy all his questions, but that was
good.
I
want to save some of them.
Hey, now I need to know, because this is what everybody wants to hear in an interview.
Yes.
Which ones that you think that I got a lousy answer on?
Yes. So this is great. There's a couple aspects of feedback that I have.
Great.
One is I really liked how you had in mind a project, or were able to think of a project that you worked on recently. And you came into this obviously without having like prepared for an interview necessarily.
None.
But you came in, or you could think of a project that you had worked on recently that you were proud of, that you were like, yeah, this is it. This is something I was happy with. And you remember the technical details, which is something that I would do in preparing for a technical interview, is go back through a number of my recent projects, whether that's fixes of bugs or whether that's building something, whether that's on a client project or whether that's on my own. And I would get familiar with it and maybe even write down some notes for those things. So that was a really, really good thing on that.
And if I could stop you there real quick.
Absolutely.
I think one thing that's just as important is you might say, well, but I don't have any projects that I can talk about that I'm super proud of. Well, frankly, that's on you. And here's the reason why I say that. I know it can sound just a little bit harsh me saying it like that, but you probably have some extra spare time. You could start up a side project. Go fix a Magento bug. Go contribute to an open source project. Go, for goodness sake, go start your own open source project. Be proud of something. And boy, does that communicate a lot to when you having a conversation like this.
The other thing I appreciated is your honesty and transparency with saying, hey, I'm not that familiar with less, and the way that Magento handles it.
Yeah.
And just saying it and just like, this is it right there.
Yep.
Some of the people that I talk to, I think, hesitate on saying anything that's negative about themselves. And I totally get that. And one of the things you don't want to do is just be down on yourself the whole time. Just depending on your perspective of yourself, it can be easy to be like, oh, I'm terrible, XYZ. But so it is good to be hesitant at times, or I should say be willing to share even some things that aren't quite as positive at times. In the
right. And again, it's a balance, but for example, when Jesse is talking to somebody, I think you can pretty quickly pick up on how good they are in an area or not. So being honest and saying, yeah, this is not let me just say, I knew he would pick up, and he already knows that I'm pretty lousy at less. So so he would already know that, but he's going to pick up on that pretty quickly. And whoever you're interviewing is going to have done a lot of this. They have good pattern recognition. So be honest. Don't be down on yourself, but just be honest.
Yep, that's great. So, to those rapid fire questions.
Yes. Okay.
All right. So, you did well on them. One of the things that I would have looked for in like this, the style sheet problem is an identification whether it's a problem or whether it's a feature, right? So they said, hey, this is missing, but was it ever there in the first place? And if it was never there in the first place, then we need to say, oh, then we add this. But if it was there in the first place, then we fix it. And so looking for a little bit more the approach sort of mindset of like, okay, which approach would you take? But then you nailed it in terms of the style sheet. Like, interestingly enough, Magento actually does struggle with printing orders. It's just a weird little thing about Magento.
Yeah.
So that's how you would fix it is by doing that. So you answered the question correctly, but just that little thought about thinking about approach sometime is also relevant.
Very good. Yeah.
Some of the other questions, all the other questions you got exactly right. Some of them, like the difference between a router and a controller, I could tell it was kind of like coming back to you a little bit. So the answer got fairly long as you went through that, but it was clear that you knew your stuff. Yeah. And that's one of the things is I hear answers to these things. I can tell the difference between people who are like, boy, like, I wonder what that means.
Remember in the good old days, my dad, he called it arm waving.
Yeah, exactly.
We probably would call it BSing now, but I mean, like, that's literally what it is. Like, I can pick up on it so quick.
Yeah, and I can tell when someone doesn't know the correct technical terms for something, but they know exactly what I'm talking about. They can picture it, and they're going to try to describe it to me best they can, even though they're not using the right.
Technical terms do not matter.
That's the thing. Yeah, they're gravy on the top. They're nice. You should know them. You should learn them. But if you don't, it's okay. Yeah. The other thing that was really great was that there's this question that I asked you, what's a return type? And you said it's a type that's returned. Like, honestly, that's the answer to the question.
Yeah. Well.
You got it. And yes, in some ways it was like a little bit like bad, but it's the right answer.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things like tests, sometimes the right answer is contained in the question.
Yeah.
It's just like, Every now and then you get one of those.
So just think about the question. I guess
Yeah.
that's the other way to put it.
Yeah. So you did great. I'm not surprised.
Do I have a job?
You definitely have a job.
Okay, good.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm not fired. That's good.
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, you did great. You nailed the questions. And it just shows like, and obviously I can't speak for other companies, but the way that I do it, the way that we do it here is just covering a lot of these kind of core concepts of Magento. And that's something you can prepare for when you go into a interview.
Absolutely.
Is just like refresh on those core concepts if they're not something you've used on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's good. Jesse, this is exciting. I think this is good.
Yeah.
And I hope this provides you value out there as you are listening to this, watching this. It's kind of entertaining to watch it, just by the way. We are standing here in Jesse's kitchen. I was trying to come up with something that rhymes with like in the kitchen, but talking in the kitchen doesn't rhyme. I've thought about a couple other words, but let's just say it does not. Those would not be appropriate to share on this podcast. So I'll leave it at that. So rhyming is just not necessarily going to be our thing here. But so we're hanging out here in Jesse's kitchen, sharing our learnings, our struggles, some of our successes as well, as we are fighting through this jungle of our goal is to be excellent, great developers. And so, Jesse, thank you for walking me through that. I appreciate
Absolutely.
that.
It was fun. You did great, and I enjoyed it.
Very good. Well, thank you for listening. It was a pleasure having you as a part here. Hopefully, you have already subscribed to this podcast. If not, please take a moment, just click that subscribe button. It's pretty easy to do. I mean, like you gotta face it, it's really easy to do, and you might miss out on more content if you don't click that button. So that would be a dangerous thing to miss out on. As always, I look forward to seeing you next time.